Hi Biology, Mr. Wagner here. We're talking a little bit about the nervous system today. So let's go through it. Nervous system. All right, we're going to talk about the anatomy, physiology, and the nervous system health. First one, nervous system divisions. We have the CNS, which is the central nervous system. That consists of the brain and spinal cord. And we also have the PNS, the peripheral nervous system. And that stands for all the nerves that branch off of the brain and the spinal cord. Kind of looks something like this. There's my CNS, brain and spinal cord. There's my PNS, which is all the other nerves that branch off. Central nervous system consists of the brain. Brain is protected by the cranium, weighs about 3 pounds. It receives information from the senses and other parts of the body. Has 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and it communicates most with the spinal cord. Let's talk about the spinal cord. It's located in the spinal cavity. It merges with the brainstem. 31 pairs of spinal nerves. It ends in the upper lumbar region. Remember, lumbar region is the lower part of your back. Protection of the CNS. The CNS is protected by meninges. Meninges are a triple layer protective tissue. The first one is called a dura mater. It literally stands for tough mother. Dura, tough, like durable, and mater is where we get our word mother. So tough mother. It's the outer layer. There's the arachnoid. It's a middle layer. And finally on the inside, it's the pia mater, or the delicate mother. The mother that's the layer that's on the inside. It's a little bit more delicate and sensitive. It's also protected by CSF, cerebral spinal fluid. It's a clear fluid. It's found in the arachnoid, and it cushions the brain. So sometimes when you get hit, the cushioning of your brain is what protects you from concussions. A concussion is when your brain actually bounces around and hits your skull and causes some damage on the inside. So this helps kind of alleviate that, make it less likely to occur. Glial cells and neurons. The brain and spinal cord are made of glial cells and neurons. Glial cells insulate and support nerve tissue, and neurons are the active nerve cells. So just like a red blood cell, a nerve cell is made out of the nerve itself. All neurons contain a cell body, dendrites, and an axon. The cell body contains the nucleus and most of the cytoplasm. The dendrite is the branch off of the cell body. It receives information from other neurons. And the axon is the tail of the neuron. It relays information to other neurons. Nerve impulses only travel in one direction. They only travel in one direction. So to send a signal back, there has to be another set of nerves also going one way in the other direction. Here's kind of what a neuron looks like. You can see the dendrites, the cell body, the cell membrane, the axon. There's little things called the nodes of Ranvier. We'll talk a little bit more about that. There's Schwann cells. We also have the nucleus, the axon. There's a myelin sheath, and then there's an axon terminal. All right. Nerve cell bodies are only found in the brain, spinal cord, and ganglia. Many ganglia together form something called a plexus. A plexus is a network of nerves. You have one right below your sternum, that bone in the center of your chest, right below there. If you touch there, it's a little soft spot. It's a little sensitive. That's where you want to punch somebody if you're in the martial arts. You punch them in the solar plexus because there's a network of nerve fibers, and it's painful there. More on neurons. There are 3 types of neurons. There's sensory, motor, and intraneurons. Sensory neurons transmit information to the CNS from the senses. In other words, is something hot or cold, sticky or wet or whatever. That's my sensory neurons. Motor neurons, they take information from the CNS to other parts of the body. And the interneurons, they are only in the CNS, and they relay information between neurons and between places in the CNS. So CNS to CNS, central nervous system to central nervous system. We have something called gray and white matter. Gray matter, it's found in the brain and spinal cord. It's composed of axons and glial cells. White because they contain myelin. Lots of myelin makes it white. Myelin is a white fatty covering. Gray matter, that's found in the brain and spinal cord. It consists of cell bodies and neurons. It is gray because it does not have myelin. There's no myelin on gray matter, therefore it's gray in color. For the PNS, composed of nerves that connect the CNS to the rest of the body. Nerves are neurons that are grouped together. Nerves can have axons several feet long, very, very long. It's very possible to have that. The PNS also has most nerves are mixed nerves. They contain sensory and motor neurons. Sensory nerve fibers, they take information from the body to the brain. Cell bodies are in the ganglia outside of the spinal cord, and they enter the spinal cord through the posterior new nerve root. That's where they enter. Motor nerve fiber, take information from the brain to the muscles. Cell bodies are in the gray matter in the spinal cord, and they enter the spinal cord through the interior nerve root. Anterior means to the back. A typical nerve contains neurons, lymph vessels, blood capillaries, and connective tissue. These are all bundled together. They bundle them all together. Axons of peripheral nerves are covered with special glial cells called Schwann cells. Schwann cells produce a lot of myelin and act as insulation around the axon. So they're insulation, it's like a protective sheath, like the rubber cord around a wire that goes to an outlet. Gaps between Schwann cells are called nodes of Ranvier. Cells with myelin transmit information faster than cells without myelin. What they do is it actually jumps from node of Ranvier to node of Ranvier, and therefore it doesn't have to travel the entire length. So it makes it go faster because it only leapfrogs and jumps parts of the way. In the CNS, myelin is produced by special glial cells called oleodendrocytes. Oleodendrocytes. Oligodendrocytes. It's a mouthful to say, but it's oligodendrocytes. Transmitting information through a nerve is an electrochemical process. At rest, a nerve has a slight negative charge inside the cell. Potassium ions are on the inside and the sodium ions are on the outside. When an impulse travels through a nerve, sodium ions are pumped in. This changes the charge from negative to positive. After an impulse moves through, then the positive ions flow out of the cell and restore the negative charge. The sodium and potassium ions move back to where they belong. And what causes this is something called a sodium-potassium pump. It literally has to pump them back to their right position so they're all ready to go for a nerve impulse. The cell then gets ready for the next nerve impulse. A nerve can fire again in 1/2000th of a second. That's how fast it is. 1/2000th of a second. A wave of electricity that moves through is called an electrochemical impulse. It's called an electrochemical impulse. Synapses are junctions between the axons of one nerve and the dendrite of another. When a nerve impulse reaches this point, a neurotransmitter is released into the synapse. This causes the impulse to go on to the next nerve. So nerves don't actually touch each other. They come very, very close, but there's a gap between them. And this is what the synapse or the gap between them looks like. Three different pictures there. And what happens is it releases a chemical called acetylcholine or ACH. And that goes in there, and then those chemicals bond with receptors on the postsynaptic cell. And then when they bond, it starts the process again of sending it on the next nerve fiber. And it just goes on that way from nerve to nerve to nerve, sending messages by little relays until the signal gets to where it needs to go. In the PNS, this occurs automatically. In the CNS, signals are not automatically sent. Usually the impulse is processed before the CNS decides what to do with the information. So this is an example of like a reflex action. You hit your knee, it reflexes before you even think. So sometimes it takes action. Impulses are processed locally before it even gets to the brain. Like if you touch a hot stove, your hand immediately pulls away before your brain can say, hey, I think that's hot, I think I should move my hand. That's how it works. Nerve impulse inhibitors block impulses from being sent. So Novocaine blocks the sensory nerves so you don't know you're in pain. This is what the doctor will give you, or the dentist will give you Novocaine before he starts working on your teeth. Novocaine is an inhibitor that stops the signal from going to where it needs to go. So as the dentist is drilling, you don't get the signal, hey, I'm experiencing pain, because Novocaine is blocking that signal. A bad example was botulinum B toxin. It blocks motor nerves, and people die because of muscles involved in breathing don't work, and people suffocate to death. So this is like if you were to go into like anaphylaxis shock, something like that. You might have this toxin in there, and it would prevent you getting signals or sending signals to your lungs to breathe. Reflex. A reflex is a quick automatic response, and a reflex arc is the simplest nerve pathway. Simplest nerve pathway. Again, like touching a hot stove, immediately it sends a signal to jerk your hand away. It doesn't have to send the signal all the way to your brain and have your brain decide, what should I do? A reflex arc. Example is like touching a hot stove. There are thermoreceptors that detect the heat. Sensory neurons carry the signal to the spinal cord. Interneurons in the spinal cord process and generate a response. Motor neurons send a message to the muscle, and the muscle jerks the hand away. It doesn't get all the way to the brain to make the decision. That's why it's called a reflex or a reflex arc. When this is going on, the sensory neurons are sending the message to the brain, and the parietal lobe processes and sends back a message of pain. This is why you feel pain after you pull your hand away. The hand pulls away first. Why? Signal hasn't gotten all the way to the brain yet. It's been responded by the spinal cord and sent back. Let's talk about the three parts of the brain, three main parts. There's the cerebrum. That's the upper part of the brain. It coordinates thought, memory, learned behavior. It's what most of us consider when we think of a brain. There's the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the part that's in the lower part of the brain. It controls balance, coordination, voluntary muscle activity. This is like your movement and your action. It's right down here at the base of your skull. And then there's the brainstem. It connects the brain to the spinal cord, and it controls the involuntary muscles, like my lungs that breathe on my own without me thinking about them. And it controls activities of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic system is the system that travels or happens automatically without me thinking about it. That's why I can sleep and I don't have to worry about not breathing, because my autonomic system will make sure I can keep doing those automatic functions like breathing on my own. So here's what it looks like. The cerebellum, the big, large part of the brain. The cerebrum is the big, large part of the brain. The cerebellum is the bottom little piece. That's the coordination aspect. And then the brainstem that controls involuntary functions. So the cerebrum, many ridges and depressions that creates surface area of gray matter, around 16 square foot, about the size of a beach ball. So even though the brain is only this big, the surface area of where oxygen and blood vessels can get into it is about the outside of a beach ball. Most of the brain's gray matter is found in the cerebral cortex. That's the outer layer of the cerebrum. As more connections are made, more gray matter is created. This is especially important during your elementary years as you're developing and forming. The cerebrum, when inefficient connections are lost, gray matter decreases. You have two halves. You have a right and a left hemisphere. They're split by a longitudinal fissure. Each hemisphere controls the opposite half of the body and is specialized. So the left side of my brain actually controls the right side of my body. The left hemisphere, that's logic side. Details, spoken language, reading, writing, math ability, formal logic, scientific skills. The right hemisphere is the creative side. Big picture, artistic awareness, 3D perception, intuition, imagination, music awareness, nonverbal information, emotion, and creativity. If a stroke damages the right half of the body, the left side would have difficulty functioning. So again, this part of the brain also controls the movement for this side of my body. So if a person has a stroke, they usually have it in one hemisphere of their brain, and it usually leads to paralysis of one half of their body. Two sides communicate through something connecting them called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum. Each hemisphere is divided into 4 different lobes. There's the frontal lobe, parietal, occipital, and the temporal. Frontal lobe is here, parietal lobes are here, occipital lobes are here, Occipital lobes are here, occipital is the back, and the temporal are up here in the temporal region. So frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital. And here's what each one of them does. The frontal lobe talks about behavior, personality, self-control, judgment, voluntary movement of skeletal muscles. The parietal lobe, temperature, pressure, pain, shape, and texture. That's all the processing that goes on there. For the occipital, vision and reading. And for the temporal lobes, those are the ones on the sides up here, hearing, taste, smell, music, visual memories, and auditory memories. That all takes place in the temporal lobes. And let's see, the cerebellum. The cerebellum is the second largest region just below the occipital lobe, behind the brainstem. Similar to the cerebrum, it has two hemispheres, very convoluted. Gray matter is packed more densely than in the cerebrum. It coordinates skeletal muscle activity. So if you're a really good athlete and very coordinated, or a great dancer, it's because you have a very good cerebellum. Muscle activity is learned in the cerebellum, and then it moves to the cerebrum. Most complex muscle coordination is handled by the cerebellum. It also controls balance and posture. The brainstem. Located between the cerebrum and the spinal cord, all nerves that connect the brain and spinal cord must pass through the brainstem. Brainstem has three main parts: the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. Let's see what they look like. So we have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. And then, of course, there's a couple of arteries that go in there also. But that's kind of what that looks like. For the brain stem, the medulla oblongata, lowest part of the brain stem, it monitors and regulates breathing, heartbeat, blood pressure, and swallowing. It triggers sneezes when nerves cross over to the opposite side. This is where the brain nerves that control this side of my body, that control this side of my body, that's where they cross over. They go down and they cross over to the other side of the body at the medulla oblongata. The pons. Pons literally means bridge. It's Latin. Links the cerebrum to the cerebellum. Helps to regulate breathing and coordinate some eye movement and facial expressions. And the midbrain, above the pons. It helps coordinate the movement of both eyes, adjust the size of the pupils to respond to light, and it operates the lens muscles to focus. So when your eyeball either gets bigger or smaller and the lens does that, that's because of the midbrain. It also contains the reticular formation in my midbrain. The reticular formation, let's talk about what that is. That's the master switch to the cerebrum. Switches off cerebral cortex when you sleep, switches on the cerebral cortex when you wake up. It adjusts alertness during the day to respond to input from senses. If it's damaged, it can retard formation. It would result in a coma. So often if people are in a coma, it's because they have a damage to the reticular formation in the brain. That's very common. Keeps body balanced and upright when still. And there's also the limbic system. This complex structure found near the brain stem and surrounded by the cerebrum coordinates activities of different parts of the brain. It generate and regulate emotions and desires. The limbic system. Some other functions that are around there or near there are called the thalamus. It's a switchboard. It routes information and signals to the appropriate area in the cerebral cortex. The hypothalamus, that is below the thalamus, and it controls the unit for automatic systems, monitors temperature, blood pressure, blood composition, physical effects of emotion, like crying, and if you're very sad or something and heaving, all those physical aspects that come with emotion are controlled by the hypothalamus. There's the hippocampus. The hippocampus stores factual memories. There's the amygdala. Amygdala. See, I haven't checked those notes in a while. Amygdala. It generates emotion and processes emotional memories. Amygdala. Sounds right. Neurological health, nutrition. If we get poor nutrition, it can cause tiredness, irritability. One example is calcium deficiency. Nerves spontaneously fire if I don't get enough calcium. Caffeine can stimulate nerve impulses, but excessive amounts can make a person nervous, irritable, and have headaches. Moderate amount is 3 cups of coffee. That's a moderate amount of caffeine. Being hydrated helps in concentration and brain power. Lots of research on food combinations that help your brain. If you like, you can check out that website right there and find out the best brain food. Fish is a good brain food as well. Has lots of good characteristics that help your brain stay nice and healthy. Some habits. Watching TV for long periods or too close can cause eye strain and nervousness. Smoking can cause headaches, trembling, nervousness, sleeplessness, and irritability. Loud sounds. Repeated or prolonged exposure to loud or sensorineural deafness can lead to sensorineural deafness. That's when you're deaf because the senses cannot process the neural information. 90 to 100 decibels can cause hearing loss. That's around the sound, around like a rock concert or an airplane engine. Most music is listened to at around 100 to 120 decibels. So you can see how you can get damage that comes in quite easily. Need to wear hearing protection if you're mowing the lawn, target shooting, or working with power tools. That will help make sure that you don't have hearing damage or hearing loss. Sleep can also affect your brain function, allowing the body to get rid of waste materials and restore strength and energy to muscles and nerves. Fatigue. Waste materials accumulate faster than they're being eliminated. All those waste materials build up. That's what leads to fatigue. During sleep, the brain goes through different cycles. Some of the cycles that the brain goes through. Each cycle includes non-REM sleep and REM sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement, and the cycle lasts about 100 to 120 minutes, so about an hour, hour and a half. Usually 4 to 5 cycles per night. Deep, restful sleep occurs during non-REM sleep. Teenagers need 9.5 hours of sleep a night. I know you're saying, no, I don't. I get by with a lot less. Well, you're not getting by at optimum efficiency. You're functioning and you're going through your day probably only being 60 or 70% of what your potential could be with a good night's sleep. Alcohol can also affect brain function. Acts as a depressant of the CNS. It depresses it and stops it from functioning correctly. The CNS slows down and doesn't react as quickly. Alcohol gets into the bloodstream very quickly, and it affects loss of central control, of self-control, loss of motor neuron control, and judgment because it becomes impaired and muscle control deteriorates. So not only are you not able to coordinate your muscles correctly, but you don't make good decisions even when you do want to coordinate your muscles. Liver breaks down alcohol. Heavy alcohol consumption can lead to nervous disorders, tremors, hepatitis, psoriasis, or kidney failure. It can affect hormone levels in males and cause birth defects in pregnant females. BAC stands for your blood alcohol concentration, and the legal limit for driving is it must be less than 0.08. So a 140-pound person could have basically 3 drinks, and they are at 0.08. Some quick facts. The average drinking age for kids. Average drinking age is 12. 10% of drinkers end up becoming alcoholics. More than 40% of fatal car accidents are alcohol-related. 17,000 to 20,000 people per year die in alcohol-related crashes. At least 50% of all violent crimes are committed under the influence of alcohol. So just a couple of things to be wary of and to be careful of. Okay, so you're using this video presentation, and what you're doing, of course, is you're answering the questions that come up on the nervous assignment. Probably have them both open at the same time and go from there. If you have any questions, please send me an email or a text. I'll be happy to get back to you. Otherwise, good luck, God bless, have a great day.